What I'm about to read out serves as an illustration of the line of thought I've shared with you in an earlier YouTube recording. There, I was talking about the sociological dimensions of George Eliot's works and focused on how her novel, entitled Middlemarch, fulfills the task to draw a comprehensive picture of society in order to demonstrate its organic nature, thus claiming that there is an inevitable interconnectedness between every individual and his or her environment. As I was saying, to illustrate these lines of thought, we have a large collection of examples to draw from at our leisure. The young Vincys are perfect specimens of the well-to-do provincial middle-class milieu they come from, and that the newcomer, Dr. Lydgate, does not seem to think so at first, is what seals his fate early on. In Book 2, tellingly entitled Old and Young, the double irony underlining his favorable judgment concerning Miss Rosamond Vincy gradually emerges as the story unfolds. On beholding the pretty maiden's musical performance at this early stage of the story, he opines that, I quote, "One need not be surprised to find the rare conjunctions of nature under circumstances apparently unfavorable. Come where they may, they always depend on conditions that are not obvious," unquote. Whether or not one judges circumstances, such as Mrs. Lemon's school and Middlemarch society, unfavorable or not, is a relative thing, depending very much on the personal circumstances of the judge. Dr. Lydgate has high family connections and has hitherto led an urban lifestyle, studying and living in metropolises like Paris and London. For him, the finding of an angel in the midst of a provincial environment does seem surprising, but he quickly comes to the conclusion that such rare conjunctions of nature, as Miss Vincy, may be the result of some underlying personal merit independent of their surroundings. However, in the course of their acquaintance, which brings about an all too hasty marriage, the first thing that becomes increasingly obvious is that Rosamond was not called the flower of Mrs. Lemon's school by accident. She may be the best product of that environment, but still its genuine product to the last and nothing more. Indeed, instead of this rare conjunction of nature proving to be superior to her unfavorable surroundings, all she does is to try and rise on the social scale and move to London, which is none other than the application of the value system she has been taught. In keeping with this, her dreams are of ranks and money, and her whole life revolves around nothing beyond the continual endeavor to appear radiant, docile, polished, and refined. Learnable accomplishments in which she excels. The crux of the matter is not simply that these surface qualities do not suffice as a proper foundation for a human being and are consequently not sufficient for a basis for a meaningful and lasting human relationship either. The problem is the additional fact that Lydgate is no less a product of the 19th century with his narrow conception of womanhood, who consequently expects to find happiness in the company of exactly one such elegant-minded canary bird. Thus, it is the inappropriateness of the inherited tastes and value systems on both sides that propels them towards mutual unhappiness, with Rosie slipping into a kind of Bovarism and his once ambitious doctor husband gradually sinking to a level of a Charles Bovary. Just as Rosie's supposedly ideal female education instilled in her is nothing besides an inclination towards sentimentality, a host of superficial ambitions, and the tools with which to fulfill the expected role of the angel in the house, so did Lydgate's manly upbringing encode the wrong values that are to be searched for in a wife. Shortly after having made the acquaintance of charming Miss Vincy, he is introduced to Miss Dorothea Brooke at the dinner party given in honor of her approaching dinner to Mr. Casaubon. His reaction to these two different types of ladies is characteristic of his mindset concerning women in general. Although he is favorably impressed by Dorothea and even finds her beautiful, yet he immediately knows that she is not his style of woman. In contrast with Miss Vincy, about whom he thinks that, I quote, "she's grace itself, she's perfectly lovely and accomplished. That is what a woman ought to be. She ought to produce the effect of exquisite music." Miss Brooke did not look at things from the proper feminine angle. The society of such women was about as relaxing as going from your work to teach a second form. instead of reclining in paradise with the sweet laughs of bird notes and blue eyes for heaven, unquote. In keeping with what has been said about the fallacy of the importance that was ascribed to one's environment, however, the makeup of both individual organisms is also to be taken into consideration when we try to understand the melancholy outcome of their lives. Rosie's unbounded egoism and Lydgate's spots of commonness are individual traits that are enough to tip the balance towards tragedy, while brother Fred Vincey's fundamental good nature plays an equally important role in his eventual development from a good-for-nothing, stylish young gentleman into a responsible, diligent man worthy of respect. Bearing in mind Eliot's call for the evolutionary process that each individual has to undergo in order to emerge from moral stupidity, that is egoism, and live life in the spirit of altruism, Rosamond is one of the classic examples of someone who fails to learn from experience and remains egoistic and without sympathy for her fellow human beings. Her brother Fred, on the other hand, succeeds in his quest. Yet it would be too easy to set his positive development down to a superior assemblage of organs in the first place, on whom the greater assemblage of organs, that is society, thus had a lesser influence in terms of preconditioning his value system. What I mean to imply is that although Fred was never as cold and calculating as his sister to begin with, he did have the great luck to benefit from the good influence of his childhood love and wife-to-be Mary Garth. The latter's healthy value system is another example of the importance of heredity, as she comes from a nigh ideal family circle whose approach to life is one of the most exemplary that Eliot ever provided her readers with. Thank you.